New York City, Gaffney, South Carolina, Elite, Acclimating, New York by itself, Mom, Elementary School. I think that's Lowell, right, for elementary school? Yeah, no, that's Los.
No, it's law school.
I'm almost positive there's one. Let me look it up. You have McDonald's, France, Victorian. You have Big Apple, Winthrop University, Switzerland, Finland, Christian Dior, Yves Saint Laurent, Oliver Chandon. Questions on anything there?
No.
And so it might be a little tough. And elementary school is not one.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, thought it was. And this will be at 5 minutes at 1:20. There I was in New York City, a wide-eyed, unjaded girl from Gaffney, South Carolina, a mill town of just over 10,000 people. I had just signed a contract with the Elite Modeling Agency, and I was considering quitting going home. It was 1978. I was 20 and I was having trouble acclimating. I thought the big city was too dominated by the drug scene. I'd come to New York to achieve, and everyone I met just wanted to party all the time. I'd grown up with my mom and 3 older sisters. My parents divorced when I was 6, and I missed them. I'd grown up, and Mom, an elementary school teacher, music teacher, had showed us early on in her gifts of flowers from her garden or poems she wrote to us that what mattered was what came from the heart, not material things. So the business, the modeling contract meant nothing to me, and I was willing to walk away. Thank goodness my agency wasn't going to let me give up easily. A stint in Paris, they thought, could give me a different perspective. It was a journey I'll never forget. The Gaffney High graduate who'd worked at McDonald's until 1 in the morning, who'd traveled in just 5 states and never been out of the country. I was relocating to France. Don't get me wrong, I was a fearless, outgoing girl, and always had been. At 7, I was so fascinated by a nearby Victorian home, I asked the lady who owned it, whom I barely knew, if I could spend the night there. She and my mom approved, and I did. And I'd gotten myself to New York. I'd dropped out of Winthrop University because I was uninspired by the schooling and because fashion interested me. Had gone to the Big Apple on a whim. I'd approached Elite about modeling. Next thing I knew, I was in Paris. Elite put me up in this huge 3-bedroom apartment in an artsy neighborhood where I roomed with girls from Switzerland and Finland. How naive I was in those days. When I first worked with designers like Christian Dior, I didn't even know who they were. I remember going to the house of Yves Saint Laurent without makeup. It was another world. The accents, the European people, the food, everything was amazing. My fascination kept me from being terrified, and I went along for the ride. One of the first people I met in Paris was Oliver Chandon, heir to the Moet and Chandon champagne business, and he soon became my boyfriend. Oliver didn't drink or smoke, and he still knew how to have a great time. We'd hop on his motorcycle, go dancing, and not drink a drop. He introduced me to artists, showed me museums and sites. Everything was so wildly intriguing that I forgot about trying to make an impression or be someone I wasn't. I was just Andy from Gaff, wearing jeans or my prized pair of pleated cream corduroys nearly everywhere I went. Still, I realized I had no idea what I was getting into when Oliver asked me to a dinner at the Royal Palace in Monaco. I wasn't the sort who even thinks about buying an evening dress. All I had was a full length drawstring skirt that I'd gotten at a little Hungarian shop for $100, which was a lot to me then. I tied it just above my bust, put a belt around my waist, threw on some sandals, and that was that. When we arrived, everything, did I pronounce the champagne right? Suzette?
I think so.
I'm like, and this is on Andy McDowell. Okay, that's
Oh, really?
yeah, she's so beautiful. Any
Yes.
questions on any of it, of the words?
No, it's just some of these names. I'm like, whatever.
Okay, so Newark is New York, New York City, add the S. Elite, I would just write E and then Leet. You have Paris. Can you write Paris? I guess two strokes.
I did two strokes.
And it, oh yeah, and it comes out. Okay. You have France, Victorian. No, did yours come out? Yeah,
Yeah.
Victorian. University is Wylong UFRPT. Finland, Switzerland. Switzerland, you can just do Switzerland. Oliver is Oliver. I would just write it like that. Hungarian. No,
No.
no, Hungarian. Oh, there it is. Well, I got Hungary, Hungar. Maybe I don't know why it's not coming out. Okay. And European, Europe is like that. Come back, Pian. This will be at 1:30. There I was in New York City, a wide-eyed, unjaded girl from Gaffney, South Carolina, a mill town of just over 10,000 people. I had just signed a contract with the Elite Modeling Agency, and I was considering quitting, going home. It was 1978, I was 20, and I was having trouble acclimating. I thought the big city was too dominated by the drug scene. I'd come to New York to achieve, and everyone I met just wanted to party all the time. I'd grown up with my mom and three older sisters. My parents divorced when I was 6, and I missed them. Mom, an elementary school music teacher, had showed us early on in her gifts of flowers from her garden or poems she wrote to us that what mattered was what came from the heart, not material things. So the business, the modeling contract meant nothing to me, and I was willing to walk away. Thank goodness my agency wasn't going to let me give up easily. A stint in Paris they thought could give me a different perspective. It was a journey I'll never forget. The Gaffney High graduate who'd worked at McDonald's until 1 in the morning, who'd traveled in just 5 states and never been out of the country, I was relocating to France. Don't get me wrong, I was a fearless, outgoing girl and always had been. At 7, I was so fascinated by a nearby Victorian home, I asked the lady who owned it, whom I barely knew, if I could spend the night there. She and my mom approved, and I did. And I'd gotten myself to New York. I'd dropped out of Winthrop University because I was uninspired by the schooling and because fashion interested me. Had gone to the Big Apple on a whim. I'd approached Elite about modeling. Next thing I knew, I was in Paris. Elite put me up in this huge 3-bedroom apartment in an artsy neighborhood where I roomed with girls from Switzerland and Finland. How naive I was in those days. When I first worked with designers like Christian Dior, I didn't even know who they were. I remember going to the house of Yves Saint Laurent without makeup. It was another world. The accents, the European people, the food, everything was amazing. My fascination kept me from being terrified, and I went along for the ride. One of the first people I met in Paris was Oliver Chandon, their heir to the Moet and Chandon champagne business. And he soon became my boyfriend. Oliver didn't drink or smoke, and he still knew how to have a great time. We'd hop on his motorcycle, go dancing, and not drink a drop. He introduced me to artists, showed me museums and sites. Everything was so wildly intriguing that I forgot about trying to make an impression or be someone I wasn't. I was just Andy from Gaff wearing jeans or my prized pair of pleated cream corduroys nearly everywhere I went. Still, I realized I had no idea what I was getting into when Oliver asked me to a dinner at the Royal Palace in Monaco. I wasn't the sort who even thinks about buying an evening dress. All I had was a full-length drawstring skirt that I'd gotten at a little Hungarian shop for $100, which was a lot to me then. I tied it just above my bust, put a belt around my waist, threw on some sandals, and that was that. When we arrived, everything was stunning, sophisticated, magical. Women dripping with diamonds. Is that where it stopped? Okay. Anything there, Suzette, on any of the words?
No.
No? And this will be then at 1:40. Oh, acclimating is written like that. Let me see. Perspective. You have material. You have, I think you can write makeup in one stroke. No? Let me look at that. I think you can. Do you have one stroke for it, Suzette?
I don't.
Maybe I'm wrong though. No.
No, I don't see.
No. And then you have neighborhood is long ABD, apartment is parmt, bedroom is berm, and then you have corduroy, there you go, corduroy. This is going to be at 1:40. There I was in New York City, a wide-eyed, unjaded girl from Gaffney, South Carolina, a mill town of just over 10,000 people. I had just signed a contract with the Elite Modeling Agency, and I was considering quitting, going home. It was 1978. I was 20, and I was having trouble acclimating. I thought the big city was too dominated by the drug scene. I'd come to New York to achieve, and everyone I met just wanted to party all the time. I had grown up with my mom and 3 older sisters. My parents divorced when I was 6, and I missed them. Mom, an elementary school music teacher, had showed us early on in her gifts of flowers from her garden or poems she wrote to us that what mattered was what came from the heart, not material things. So the business, the modeling contract meant nothing to me, and I was willing to walk away. Thank goodness my agency wasn't going to let me give up easily. A stint in Paris they thought could give me different perspectives. It was a journey I'll never forget. The Gaffney High graduate who'd worked at McDonald's until 1 in the morning, who'd traveled in just 5 states and never been out of the country, I was relocating to France. Don't get me wrong, I was a fearless, outgoing girl and always had been. At 7, I was so fascinated by a nearby Victorian home, I asked the lady who owned it, whom I barely knew, if I could spend the night there. She and my mom approved, and I did. And I'd gotten myself to New York. I'd dropped out of Winthrop University because I was uninspired by the schooling and because fashion interested me. Had gone to the Big Apple on a whim. I'd approached Elite about modeling. Next thing I knew, I was in Paris. Elite put me up in this huge 3-bedroom apartment in an artsy neighborhood where I roomed with girls from Switzerland and Finland. How naive I was in those days. When I first worked with designers like Christian Dior, I didn't even know who they were. I remember going to the house of Yves Saint Laurent without makeup. It was another world. The accents, the European food, the people, everything was amazing. My fascination kept me from being terrified, and I went along for the ride. One of the first people I met in Paris was Oliver Chandon, heir to the Moet and Chandon champagne business, and he soon became my boyfriend. Oliver didn't drink or smoke, and he still knew how to have a great time. We'd hop on his motorcycle, go dancing, and not drink a drop. He introduced me to artists, showed me museums and sites. Everything was so wildly intriguing that I forgot about trying to make an impression or be someone I wasn't. I was just Andy from Gap wearing jeans or my prized pair of pleated cream corduroys nearly everywhere I went. Still, I realized I had no idea what I was getting into when Oliver asked me to a dinner at the Royal Palace in Monaco. I wasn't the sort who even thinks about buying an evening dress. All I had was a full-length drawstring skirt that I'd gotten at a little Hungarian shop for $100, which was a lot to me then. I tied it just above my bust, put a belt around my waist, threw on some sandals, and that was that. When we arrived, everything was stunning, sophisticated, magical. Women dripping with diamonds practically floated in their beautiful gowns. Oliver introduced me to Princesses Stephanie and Caroline, Prince Albert, race car drivers, loads of society people. He whispered that he was proud to have me with him. Margot Hemingway, a friend of Oliver's, came over, wearing an elegant hand-beaded dress. She looked at my skirt and said, "I wish I'd worn something like that." She wasn't being sarcastic. She was serious. "You look fabulous," she said. Anything there?
No.
No?
No.
And so this will be at 1:50. There I was in New York City, a wide-eyed, unjaded girl from Gaffney, South Carolina, a mill town of just over 10,000 people. I had just signed a contract with the Elite modeling agency, and I was considering quitting, going home. It was 1978. I was 20, and I was having trouble acclimating. I thought the big city was too dominated by the drug scene. I'd come to New York to achieve, and everyone I met just wanted to party all the time. I'd grown up with my mom and 3 older sisters. My parents divorced when I was 6, and I missed them. Mom, an elementary school music teacher, had showed us early on in her gifts of flowers from her garden or poems she wrote to us that what mattered was what came from the heart, not material things. So the business, the modeling contract meant nothing to me, and I was willing to walk away. Thank goodness my agency wasn't going to let me give up easily. A stint in Paris they thought could give me a different perspective. It was a journey I'll never forget. The Gaffney High graduate who'd worked at McDonald's until 1 in the morning, who'd traveled in just 5 states and never been out of the country, I was relocating to France. Don't get me wrong, I was a fearless, outgoing girl and always had been. At 7, I was so fascinated by a nearby Victorian home, I asked the lady who owned it, whom I barely knew, if I could spend the night there. She and my mom approved, and I did. And I'd gotten myself to New York. I'd dropped out of Winthrop University because I was uninspired by the schooling and because fashion interested me, had gone to the Big Apple on a whim. I'd approached Elite about modeling. Next thing I knew, I was in Paris. Elite put me up in this huge 3-bedroom apartment in an artsy neighborhood where I roomed with girls from Switzerland and Finland. How naive I was in those days. When I first worked with designers like Christian Dior, I didn't even know who they were. I remember going to the house of Yves Saint Laurent without makeup. It was another world. The accents, the European people, the food, everything was amazing. My fascination kept me from being terrified, and I went along for the ride. One of the first people I met in Paris was Oliver Chandon, heir to the Moet and Chandon champagne business, and he soon became my boyfriend. Oliver didn't drink or smoke, and he still knew how to have a great time. We'd hop on his motorcycle, go dancing, and not drink a drop. He introduced me to artists, showed me museums and sights. Everything was so wildly intriguing that I forgot about trying to make an impression or be someone I wasn't. I was just Andy from Gaff, wearing jeans or my prized pair of pleated cream corduroys nearly everywhere I went. Still, I realized I had no idea what I was getting into when Oliver asked me to dinner at the Royal Palace in Monaco. I wasn't the sort who even thinks about buying an evening dress. All I had was a full-length drawstring skirt that I'd gotten at a little Hungarian shop for $100, which was a lot to me then. I tried it just above my bust. I tied it, put a belt around my waist, threw on some sandals, and that was that. When we arrived, everything was stunning, sophisticated, magical. Women dripping with diamonds practically floated in their gowns. Oliver introduced me to Princesses Stephanie and Caroline, Prince Albert, race car drivers, loads of society people. He whispered that he was proud to have me with him. Margot Hemingway, friend of Oliver's, came over wearing an elegant hand-beaded dress. She looked at my skirt and said, "I wish I'd worn something like that." She wasn't being sarcastic. She was serious. "You look fabulous," she said. Later that night, I thought about how in the few months I'd been in Paris, going to wonderful parties with Oliver, riding horses into the ocean with people who played polo. And Suzette, do you want to stay on for your tests?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm not going to give you readback. I'll just go into your tests. Okay, Suzette?
Yes.
And so the proper names are in Blackboard on your 148, number 1. You have David, Diego, DNA, and I think City Hall is in there too.
Okay.
Okay? Cap them both.
Yeah.
Any questions on anything there?
The proper names aren't on there yet, though.
The proper names aren't there?
Not yet.
Are you sure? Did you look, Suzette?
Yeah, I just checked.
Okay, look, so let me write them for you. And so I thought they were. You have David, Diego, it's just Diego.
Okay.
Okay, and then you have DNA, and I think you can write NA together. No. Yeah, you can write DNA, and then City Hall.
Okay.
Cap them both, okay?
Okay.
And then this is going to be 140 lit number 1. I'm going to mute you for 5 minutes. (140 lit number 1). He was going to jail. That is for sure. In another hour, he would be in a cell with a man who had been arrested for being drunk in public. David was never so happy as this to see a drunk in his life. The man passed out as soon as he was led into the cell, and he didn't wake up. So David still had no one to talk to. The next morning, he was moved to another jail, and there he was given a short lesson in how to survive in jail. He was playing cards through the bars and minding his own business when another inmate walked up and took his cigarettes from him. His new cellmate, a man named Diego, took him aside and told him right off that you had to do something about it, or he would have no peace. At first, David wasn't sure what he meant by that, so Diego talked to him a long time about all the rules that go along with jail time. Later that night, David beat the thief with a dinner tray until the tray bent. The whole tier was locked down for 3 days. There were 48 inmates on that tier, and not one of them ratted him out. He never did feel good about what he had done, but he also never got bothered by anyone for 18 months that he was locked up ever. He knew that if he hadn't beat the man down, that he would not be able to stand up by himself ever again. He spent the 18 months feeling like an outsider in the jail. Most of the inmates had been in jail for a long time, and they all seemed to know each other. It felt to David like they were always having some kind of a reunion and catching up on the latest gossip and news all the time. He stayed off on the sidelines by himself and tried not to be noticed. He didn't like to fight, but he did know how. And he was grateful that his dad had taught him something useful. He sat for hours and listened to the men talk all night, and he realized that the jail was their world. It was their entire world, and many on the inside would never make it on the outside. He was sure that it would never be his world. Then one day, the trial was over. The girl said that David was one of the 2 men who had raped her. His own family testified that David had gone to work on the bus that day, just like he always did, and that he had come home as usual on the bus and was at home with them all the rest of the night. The bus driver remembered that David was a regular passenger of his, but he couldn't recall if he had seen him on the bus that day or not. The jury chose to believe the girl, and he was sentenced to 12 to 60 years. He was 22 years old at the time. He hated jail, and he got into a lot of fights. One day, while he was taking a shower, 4 men came after him, and he had to fight them off alone. No one came to help him. One of the friends he made in jail went to bed with a plastic bag tied over his head. He pulled up the cover so that the guards wouldn't see him. After 3 years in jail, David was running a betting ring and had inmates and the guards as his players. He read about DNA testing, and he wrote himself a brief and applied for a writ. It was granted. Back home after 11 years in jail, David found that he was carrying some bags that were not easy to drop. He could not go to the airport because he had been arrested there. He couldn't ride a bus or a train because of the noise and the crowds. He spent most of his time sitting on his, and so City Hall didn't come out, okay? No City Hall. And then we have the next test. You have 140 number 2, Europe and United States. Europe and United States, and that's it, okay? Europe is Y long U R P, Europe. Okay, here we go. Europe, Y long U R P, and this is 140 lit number 2 for 5 minutes. Good night, sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite. This common goodnight verse from the past may be truer than you think or than you care to imagine. Yes, unfortunately, it is true. Bed bugs are making a comeback in a very big way in the United States and in Europe these days. Bed bugs are very, very small, and they are particularly known to make their way into your home and into your life after you have been on a trip and stayed in a hotel. Bed bugs are worldwide travelers, and it is easy for them to latch onto your clothing and come home with you as unwelcome guests. It is no longer uncommon for them to infest an entire hotel or apartment building or store for that matter. And bed bugs don't care how clean you are or how much money you have. Bed bugs do not discriminate, and so they will gladly latch on to you whether you are rich or poor. Bed bugs are small, flat, wingless insects that like to feed on blood, human blood to be precise. They range in color from white to brown, but after feeding they turn red. They are not much longer than 0.2 inches, and they can be seen by the naked eye if you know what you are looking for. Bed bugs can survive up to a year without feeding on any blood at all. So, trying to get rid of them is a real problem. They are able to hide in small cracks and crevices, and they are called bed bugs because they like to hide in bedding and mattresses. They are difficult to find and even harder to get rid of. A female bed bug can lay up to 300 eggs, which will hatch within 10 days, which will quickly add to the rank and file of the insect army. More often than not, it is the bites you get from the bed bugs that will let you know that you have them. They tend to bite in a line that will appear on your skin, and they will often bite around the shoulders and the arms. You will be able to see a line of small bites, but it is unlikely that you will feel it when you are being bitten. Bed bugs tend to get to work on you near dawn when you are sound asleep. They are good at hiding out after they bite, as they need time to digest their meal. In fact, unless you know what you are looking for, you really have to search them out in order to find them. A lot of the time, the evidence of bed bugs is discovered rather than the bed bugs themselves. Since these insects don't care whether you are rich or poor or how much you are paying for a night in a hotel, it is a good idea to do a complete inspection of any hotel room you are going to sleep in before turning in for the night. Rusty colored spots on sheets, for example, are caused by the insects. And another sign of them is small black specks or dots on your bedding. Pay special attention to the cording around the base of the mattress. Most bed bugs can be found in the crevices of mattresses or of chairs and couches. They can often be seen between the headboard of a bed and the wall. Because the insects prefer wood and fabric to plastic and metal, they tend to nest in the areas of your home that are most lived in, such as the bedroom. Once an infestation has occurred, the key to getting rid of bed bugs is to either hire someone to do it or do it yourself. But buyer beware. If you decide to get rid of them yourself, you must be very persistent and do not give up. It isn't enough to just clean the mattresses and wash all of your bedding. The first step is to get rid of all of your bedding and your mattress. Do not take chances with just cleaning those items. If you are serious about getting okay, and then we'll get ready for your 120s. Number 1. Proper names, you have Freddie, Mrs. Blair, hard to place, Protestant, English, French, Francis, Edwin Pearson, Mrs. Pearson, Mr. Pearson. And this is going to be 120 lit number 1 for 5 minutes. And I think it continues, yes. Whatever you hear on the first, you'll hear on the second. I remember the first time I saw Freddie. He was standing in his playpen at the adoption agency where I work. He gave me a toothy grin. What a beautiful baby, I thought. His boarding mother gathered him into her arms. Will you be able to find a family for Freddie? Then I saw it. Freddie had been born without arms. He's so smart. He's only 10 months old and already he walks and talks. She kissed him. Say book for Mrs. Blair. Freddie grinned at me and hid his head on his boarding mother's shoulder. Now, Freddie, don't act that way, she said. He's really very friendly, she added. Such a good boy. Freddie reminded me of my own son when he was that age. The same thick dark curls, the same brown eyes. You won't forget him, Mrs. Blair. You will try? I won't forget. I went upstairs and got out my latest copy of the hard to place list. Freddie is a 10-month-old white Protestant boy of English and French background. He has brown eyes, dark brown hair, and fair skin. Freddie was born without arms but is otherwise in good health. His boarding mother feels he is of superior mentality and he is already walking and saying a few words. Freddie is a warm, affectionate child who has been surrendered by his natural mother and is ready for adoption. He's ready, I thought, but who is ready for him? It was 10 o'clock on a lovely late summer morning, and the agency was full of couples having interviews, couples meeting babies, families being born. These couples nearly always have the same dream. They want a child as much like themselves as possible, as young as possible, and most important, a child with no problems. If he develops a problem after we get him, they say, that is a risk we'll take just like any other parents, but to pick a baby who already has a problem, that's too much. And who can blame them? I wasn't alone in looking for parents for Freddie. Any of the caseworkers meeting a new couple started with a hope. Maybe they were for Freddie. But summer slipped into fall and Freddie was with us for his first birthday. Freddie is so big, said Freddie, laughing, so big. And then I found out. I found them. It started out, as it always does, an impersonal record in my box. A new case, a new home study. Two people who wanted a child. They were Frances and Edwin Pearson. She was 41, he was 45. She was a housewife, he was a truck driver. I went to see them. They lived in a tiny white frame house in a big yard full of sun and old trees. They greeted me together at the door, eager and scared to death. Mrs. Pearson produced steaming coffee and oven warm cookies. They sat before me on the sofa close together, holding hands. After a moment, Mrs. Pearson began, "Today is our wedding anniversary, 18 years. Good years." Mr. Pearson looked at his wife. "Except," yes, she said, "except, always the except." She looked around the room. "It's too neat," she said. "You know, I thought of my own living room with my 3 children. Teenagers now, yes," I said. "I know. Perhaps we're too old." I smiled. "You don't think so?" I said. "We don't either. You always think it will be this month and then next month," Mr. Pearson said. "Examinations, tests, all kinds of things, over and over, but nothing." Okay. And then you have your 120 number 2. Proper names. It continues. Mr. Pearson, Mrs. Pearson, Freddie's, Fran, Frederick, Christmas. And this will be number 2 for 5 minutes. You just go on hoping and hoping, and time keeps slipping by. "We've tried to adopt before this," Mr. Pearson said. "One agency told us our apartment was too small, so we got this house. Then another agency said I didn't make enough money. We had decided that was it. But this friend told us about you, and we decided to make one last try." "I'm glad," I said. Mrs. Pearson glanced at her husband proudly. "Can we choose at all?" she asked. "A boy for my husband?" "We'll try for a boy," I said. "What kind of boy?" Mrs. Pearson laughed. "How many kinds are there? Just a boy. My husband is very athletic. He played football in high school, basketball too, and track. He would be good for a boy." Mr. Pearson looked at me. "I know you can't tell exactly," he said, "but can you give us any idea how soon? We've waited so long." I hesitated. There is always this question. "Next summer, maybe," said Mrs. Pearson. "We could take him to the beach." "That long?" Mr. Pearson said. "Don't you have anyone at all? There must be a little boy somewhere." After a pause, he went on. "Of course, we can't give him as much as other people. We haven't a lot of money saved up." "We've got a lot of love," his wife said. "We've saved up a lot of that." "Well," I said cautiously, "there is a little boy. He is 13 months old." "Oh," Mrs. Pearson said, "just a beautiful age." "I have a picture of him," I said, reaching for my purse. I handed them Freddie's picture. "He is a wonderful little boy," I said, "but he was born without arms." They studied the picture in silence. He looked at her. "What do you think, Fran?" "Kickball," Mrs. Pearson said. "You could teach him kickball." Athletics are not so important, Mr. Pearson said. He can learn to use his head. Arms he can do without. A head never. He can go to college, we'll save for it. A boy is a boy, Mrs. Pearson insisted. He needs to play. You can teach him. I'll teach him. Arms aren't everything. Maybe we can get him some. They had forgotten me, but maybe Mr. Pearson was right, I thought. Maybe sometime Freddie could be fitted with artificial arms. He did have nubs where arms should be. Then you might like to see him. They looked up. When could we have him? You think you might want him? Mrs. Pearson looked at me. Might, she said. Might? We want him, her husband said. Mrs. Pearson went back to the picture. You've been waiting for us, she said, haven't you? His name is Freddie, I said, but you can change it. No, said Mr. Pearson, Frederick Pearson, it's good together. And that was it. There were formalities, of course, and by the time we set the day, Christmas lights were strung across city streets and wreaths were hung everywhere. I met the Pearsons in the waiting room. There was a little snow on them both. Your son's here already, I told them. Let's go upstairs, and I'll bring him to you. I've got butterflies, Mrs. Pearson announced. Suppose he doesn't like us. I put my hand on her arm. I'll get him, I said. Freddie's boarding mother had dressed him in a new white suit with a sprig of green holly and red berries embroidered on a collar. His hair shone a mop of dark curls. Going home, Freddie said to me, smiling as his. Okay, and so that concludes your lits, you all. Have a great day, type one up, and keep on practicing, okay? We're reaching the end. Give it your all.